Welcome to the Nightbird Radio podcast. I'm Timothy Saylor, and I'm going to be your host this evening as we sound out the subconscious, navigate the nocturnal, and explore the farthest reaches of our experience. Coming at you from a 1986 Dodge Ram van on the rolling foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Great Forest, deep in the heart of the Kali Yuga. This is radio for the hauntological turn. And welcome back, Nightbirds. It's great to have you back, and it's great to be back. I know it's been a couple of weeks. We had some unforeseen difficulties with scheduling, as well as some Mercury retrograde-related weirdness. But, like I said, it's great to have you back. I've got an awesome episode for you tonight. We had the honor and the privilege to welcome Chris Harden to the show. Chris is many things. A Gnostic bishop, a Thelemite, a musician, and a scholar who holds bachelor's degrees in philosophy and mathematics, a master's in scientific computing, and a PhD in computational science. He's also a wellspring of historical information, and I had a blast talking to him. Our conversation got me thinking of witch hunts. Aren't they, after all, a function of orthodoxy and strict dogma? A feature rather than a bug. Don't these strictures actually create the very heretics and apostates they claim to root out? All in an attempt to consolidate their fragile claims to primacy? So in our conversation, we talk about headlessness, anarchy, apostasy, overcoming fear in the new Aeon, and Chris gave me a crash course in OTO and AA history, but also so much more. But before we get into the discussion, I'm going to read some lyrics from a song by Prince and the New Power Generation called 7. And we lay down on the sand of the sea, and before us animosity will stand and decree that we speak not of love, only blasphemy. And in the distance 6 others will curse me. But that's all right, for I will watch them fall. Think about that as you listen to our conversation. And without further ado, let's get to it. How's it going, Chris? Welcome to the Nightbird Radio podcast.
Woo! It's going well. It's been a weird few days. I live way up here in the mountains, and we had a weird late spring snowstorm, and they're always real wet, heavy snows, and so trees fall, and we had a problem way down the road. We were like 24 hours almost with no power and water. And so, I mean, I heat my house with wood. I'm like kung fu and shit up here. It's like carry water, chop wood, check.
That's the way to be.
You know, so I wasn't cold or anything, but it's like, fuck, man. You know, when you're out of power, it's like all the cool stuff you do, you realize, I mean, I could deal without internet, but it's like, you know, I want to like plug in my fucking instruments and be loud and stuff.
Right. Yeah. And of course, this Mercury retrograde has been crazy.
And it's funny too, because I was just talking shit about how, you know, like I'm a physicist, so I'm like, you know, planets don't actually move backwards, you know, this whole retro. I was like, I swear, right when it started, I had this like young student who was like being all nervous about it. I was like, you know, it's a symbol, you know, like planets don't go backward. And then it's like been wrecked for me. This whole one was like, oh, really? Hold my beer. Funny story.
Yeah, I was talking to my buddy about it, and what he said about it was, it's been like what other people always try to make it, like, oh, Mercury retrograde. Like this one has been like how people try to make it out to be. You know?
Yeah. Well, and I'm a scientist, a mathematician, but I'm also an occultist, and I use astrology a lot. But it's like, to me, it's like algebra or something. You know, we made it all up, but it's useful.
Right. Yeah, it's a useful model. Man, yeah. So you know what's funny? Right before we got on here, you know, you said you hadn't had power or water in a day or so.
Right.
Our water went out.
Oh, no way.
There's always something messing around, man. Well, cool. So let's just go ahead right into the interview, man. I wanted to ask you some questions. For one thing, again, it's great to have you on. just from our conversation that we had on the phone, I knew this was going to be like a really interesting conversation, and I've really been looking forward to it. And so I'm glad to be here at long last. So let me ask you first.
Yeah.
Have you always felt that there was more to life than meets the eye?
I have. Well, it's based on experience. I'm a gnostic, and more so in just the sense of, I don't think the mysteries, the unspeakable parts of life have any meaning for you unless you can find a way to have a direct experience of it. And so, my knowing is through my own experiences, which it's hard to, you can at least get a cool story over on somebody else, but, until they have their own experience, it's just bullshit in a way, right? Or it's just something Chris said anyhow. But, when I was very young, I grew up in Florida. I was probably 8 or 9. Me and my cousin got sucked in this undertow way out into the ocean. And we were like sinking to the bottom and like pushing up and like catching breaths and sinking so we didn't tread water the whole time. And it was scary. And all of a sudden, what we both thought was a guy came and grabbed both of us like under each arm and walked to the shore where it was like a foot of water, dropped us, and we turned around and be like, oh my God, thank you so much. And there was nothing there. And so, experiences such as that, like throughout my life, it always, for as long as I can remember since being a little kid, I just felt like the adults were either really dumb or just lying about everything. Like they weren't telling, and mostly they're dumb, I found out. But so, but I've been like, what the fuck is going on here? Like the whole time.
Yeah. That sense of astonishment, I think, is really important, right? Like just because, like you said, I've often walked around and had this moment where I'm looking around and I'm like, does anyone else realize how fucking crazy this is?
Yeah.
This whole thing. And I think that's a very Gnostic concept too, like the idea of like the machinations beyond, however you want to use it, if it's just a symbol or not. But
well, the mysteries draw you in that way. And and they open up, to that kind of true wonderment, that aspiration, that astonishment with what the fuck of it all, like how is this something rather than nothing? But it's not just something, right? It's this really fucking fun, gooey something, it's like we get to ride roller coasters and shit. And we didn't do anything to deserve this. That's grace, man.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the ancestors looking out.
Yeah, all of it.
So for you, it was really more of a knowing that then was backed up by experience.
Yeah, and it was a really I was drawn in because I want to figure this out, and I always knew I couldn't trust the adults to tell me somehow, as long as I could remember.
And so, is that also what led you to pursue your degrees?
Yeah, absolutely. Also, when I found the OTO when I was 19. And I'd been involved in Freemasonry, and so I know we might talk about that in a bit, but all these guys were like the professors at my community college. And so that had a big impact too, because it was like, okay, well, that's because, I was coming from this like anarchist, hardcore revolutionary background. And it's funny because now the conservatives say that the university is like, will turn you into a leftist. I was like this leftist. It was like, oh, this university is going to turn me into some kind of like brain dead conservative. I'm going to like start voting for presidents and think it matters. Like that. I was like, really, like as a kid, I was like, oh, I don't know about this school thing, but it was those guys and seeing them, even though they were like pretty, in terms of politics, they were pretty bland, older white guys or whatever, however they voted. It was kind of all the same to me. But but seeing that, it was like, okay, well, this is one way. Like I felt like I could scam the scam, right? If it was a scam, I could get in there and be aware of it and scam it back and get something out of it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. There's something that my brother told me, and I don't even know if he remembers telling me this. It was one of those moments where like, was this guy channeling something? Because it was some project I had to do in school, right? And I hated school. It was like, I just think it's designed to break people. Right. And it had me feeling pretty broken. I couldn't function in it. And then it was really causing me a lot of needless trauma, I guess is the way to put it. And so one day I came home and I was like crying and crying. And that night I was still crying and frustrated. And me and my brother shared a room. And in the silence, he said to me, take everything that they teach you and use it against them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's the only way to beat a scam is to scam it right back.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. So you mentioned being drawn to the lodge at an early age. That is an early age for that, right? I mean,
I think so. I was a Hare Krishna devotee at 16. I was like a little punk rock kid. Now I dropped out.
So you've always been a searcher.
Grade. I dropped out of high school in the 10th grade to tour with my punk rock band. And I went back to school and got for 14 years and got all these fucking degrees because I wanted to prove something to myself ultimately really there. But I just never wanted to be full of shit, like I didn't want to grow up and be the adult who was like lying to the children and full of shit. It was like, pick a fucking side, man. And so, I was this Hare Krishna. So I was this punk rock kid, and I got wrapped up with the anarchist Black Cross and some of these political groups. And there was this one kid who was a Hare Krishna devotee. We were having this like political discussion group meeting night, and we started talking about the meaning of life. And this kid was like, I know the meaning of life. I can't tell you. It'll drive you all crazy. You can't handle it. And that just pissed me off. I was like, you're full of shit. You would say it if you knew it. And we kind of got in a fight. And then at the end, he like followed me to my car and gave me this book by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada called The Path to Perfection. And it was probably maybe the first like real spiritual book I read. And I'd always been fascinated with religion. I didn't grow up. My parents weren't religious, I didn't go to church and stuff, but like I had family who did. So I would go with them and be like, this is weird. But, I was like a punk rock kid at the beach, and the Christians are out there like, oh, you have a mohawk, you're going to hell, so I already knew that they were pretty much full of shit. And of course there's deep, profound Christian mysteries, but those guys on the street telling you you're going to hell, they usually don't know any of the stuff.
Right.
Anyway, but, so I've reconciled those mysteries, aside from the idiots out there, just trying to control you and stuff. But I read this book, and it was like remembering things about the truth of myself, so to speak. And it led me down this path of bhakti yoga, and I had certain spiritual experiences. And so the turn to like the occult world there was a couple things going on there. For one, I had this experience through this very, I didn't grow up around that kind of stuff. So it was a very foreign, I think I needed that because I could take it more seriously, because the stuff I grew up around, I was like, oh, these guys are idiots. And even though there's profound mysteries to explore there, I knew those weren't the people to show me. And so anyway, and again, it's back to this experience, so I had these profound spiritual experiences. I had experiences of parts of myself outside of our normal selves, outside of our body, outside of our normal, waking states and so forth. And so I went back to sort of the Western traditions with those experiences, trying to reconcile it. And it was the mystery traditions, the mystical traditions like Kabbalah, the Hermetic traditions, Rosicrucians. And through all that, the Masonic stuff just kept popping up, and my family were all Masonic, Freemasons and stuff. But of course, I thought, these guys are idiots, so they're not going to be able to teach me what Freemasonry is. So one day we had this anarchist house. The whole front of the house was this Hare Krishna temple, and our house got raided by 22 cops in like black fatigues and masks and all this in Jacksonville, Florida in 1995. And our house gets raided, and we had been training like guerrilla tactics with these like we'd carve out stencils in cardboard and like hit and run these like slogans all over the place, and like we do it in the middle of the night, and we were running like little kids like reading the guerrilla books and like, okay, let's try this. We'll go out. We're a unit, Anyway, they found all that stuff and they tried to build this case. They added up like all the graffiti in all of downtown and tried to charge it with us. And so they came to our jobs and arrested us like a week later. So we all lost our jobs, which landed me loading trucks. My mom worked at this cold storage facility. So I was like loading trucks. Like they pay you by weight, like how much weight you moved that day and shit. It was like fucking slave shit. And so of course, I'm in the South working a shit job. I'm out there. I'm like the only white dude out there, right? And I'm working with all these older like black guys, and they're all like wearing their Masonic belt buckles. And one day at lunch, they're all discussing it. And I've been reading this. God, what was that book? Freemasonry, Ancient Egypt, and Islamic Destiny. Is the book, and it's written by like one of these Nation of Islam conspiracy guys, so it had a lot of the juicy like stuff in there, but like a lot of pro stuff. It wasn't like, oh, they're Satanists, like the white like militia, conservative, alt-right, I guess you call it now, type folks that turn it on like there are Satan worshippers. And and for those guys, it's like, man, have you met these people? It's like they fucking play bingo, like that's lively for them, like relax. It's not that cool. I stole the fire. I'm here to tell you, it's not that cool. I mean, if they were worshiping Satan, I'd probably still be involved. So I met all these old black guys, and I'm like this. I was always a smart ass, like know-it-all little kid, and I'd read one book, so I knew everything. Actually, I had like Morals and Dogma, and I'd flip through more books, but I really had read this one, and so I went over and I started like breaking down philosophical notions of the compass and the square, and they were all giggling and laughing at me. At the end of the day, though, this older guy pulls me aside, and he's a past master of the oldest Prince Hall Freemason, all black Mason lodge in downtown Jacksonville. And he's like, you should come do this. He's like, I'll stand with you. His name was John. And there's a Masonic mystery of the god John. And so it really plays into all this in a cool kind of way in terms of my story. And this all comes out in the book too, because I go through the whole thing. And so so I went and I became the first, like 19 years old, I became a master Mason in the oldest Prince Hall Lodge. And, they put it to me real hard, and I wanted it that way. It was better for me. I'm not sure if that's better for everybody, but, like they beat me up and stuff. I mean, they hazed the fuck out of me. I was coming home like bruised up. My wife was like trying to go fight him and shit. It was serious. They made sure I wanted it, and I did. And I got exactly what I was after. But, these are like suit and tie dudes who are like trying to get me to join their church. It got boring, right? So right around that time, the OTO sort of emerged. And, I was looking at this book called the Equinox 310, and it goes over the structure, and it's got this Masonic structure, but it's incorporated like the chakra points. And so it's like there's yoga, magic. It's like everything I'd been into up to that point sort of was all in one place there, and it's a quasi Masonic thing. The first 7 degrees of OTO are called the Masonic Academy. It's a consolidation of like all the Masonic rites that ever were into like just 7. So like there's, like the 7th degree is like Prince of the Sublime Secret, just like 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. So like the titles and stuff are very common.
Gotcha.
But I was like, oh, chakras and magic and shit, because I just started working Modern Magic, this Donna Michael Craig book, and I just started doing these pentagram rituals because I realized for a Western experience, you have to kind of become your own priest if you want to like be able to instantiate those sort of experiences throughout that tradition. And so that's what brought me to the Kabbalah and ceremonial magic type stuff. And it's like as soon as I started doing ceremonial magic, because I was like big in the punk scene, I was like the leader of this big punk band in my hometown, so I knew all the weirdos pretty well. And so this kid, this industrial, super weird kid, even for me, like I ran into him at the store, and he starts talking to me about the OTO, and I just read about it. Now, a year before, I bought the Book of the Law, which is the sort of holy book of Thelema that Crowley channeled in Cairo in 1904. I had bought that thing. I read it, and I thought, this is the dumbest shit I've ever fucking read in my entire life. I threw it on my shelf and didn't think much more about it. And back then it was like this little red book. It didn't say Crowley. So I still hadn't put all of it together. That was like Crowley, Book of the Law, Thelema. Okay. And OTO is an extension of that, yada, yada. So I was just looking at the OTO as this Masonic system that incorporated magic and yoga and tantra and shit. And so I was like, man, this is way cooler than these guys who keep trying to take me to church, which, I was over that pretty quick. I mean, I worked real hard for the initiation, so I feel like it really worked on me. But then it's funny, my whole family are Masons. None of them will talk to me about Masonry because I'm this clandestine black Mason. It's even perfect. So better.
Yeah, that's what's up.
Yeah. So it's like, it was like a hard, like I had to really want this shit, and I did, and I pushed through, and it was great. But I went to this guy, this weirdo industrial kid took me to the OTO, and it was like, man, I was like, these are like sickly old white people. They're doing drugs, eating meat. Like, I was like a little Hare Krishna kid. I was like straight edge. I've been vegetarian for years at this point. I was like, they're not serious. I talked them into like sponsoring me and setting up an entry level initiation. There's 0 degrees called Minerva in OTO. And so like that night at my very first meeting with these guys, I got sponsors, got an application filled out, and had them schedule around. And I ended up being the last like initiate to come through that lodge before that all fell apart. This is Raharakne Lodge in 1996 now in Jacksonville, Florida. And so it was a huge year. I got married, became a Master Mason, joined the OTOs, went back to school, and then had a kid.
Yeah, blast off.
All right. Good times.
So you mentioned you're currently writing a book about your experience with the OTO. Do you want to go into a little bit talk about the events of your book a little bit? What can you share with me on that?
Well, I mean, basically everything I've been saying is part of the story of the whole book, because what is the OTO, is probably, some basic thing needs to be said there. The OTO was founded in the late 19th century by a rich paper chemist named Karl Kellner, who was traveling in the East. He was a high-grade Freemason in Austria. He was traveling in the East, and he ran across 3 teachers. One was a Tantra guy, and 2 of them were Sufis. And they taught him this technique of sexual magic, sexual thaumaturgy, like how to create miracles with sex, essentially. And to him, that sort of tied together like all of the high level secrets of Freemasonry and sort of Western esotericism, Hermeticism, the Rosicrucian thing, all of it, in such a way that he went back to Austria, and he held charters for, Mizraim, Memphis, York, Scott, all of Swedenborg, all of these exotic Masonic rites. And so he took all this information and consolidated into the MMM, the first 7 degrees of OTO, which are like a consolidation of all of those mysteries. And then part of the 7th, and then the 8th and the 9th is the OTO proper, where you get taught this technique of sexual thaumaturgy. And so the structure of the OTO has all the trappings of these old school Masonic monarchies. Essentially, it's all based on these notions of Plato's philosopher king, this idea of having this enlightened dictator, essentially. And in the modern era, especially as an anarchist kid, for the first 15 years I was in the OTO. I was in these small bodies that were very local. It was like me and 10 of my homies like doing all these initiation ceremonies and masses and shit and having the fucking time of our lives. Like nobody ever thought about this guy that we called our king who lived in, we'd never met him. It was just like some shit on paper. And it's like, we just thought, okay, this is a game. Like
you're like really a cell.
Nobody thinks, it's like, we never thought, like, I never imagined anybody took these titles seriously. It's like, it's like if everyone were playing Monopoly and then all of a sudden everyone's stabbing each other over the fucking orange piece of paper with a 10 on it. It's like, dude, it's a game. And that, and it could have been good if there was leadership in place to sort of maintain that idea. But, all this stuff becomes a cult of personality, especially, so with the OTO, the first half of the system is pretty much open to anyone. Nobody can stop you from moving through it. But about halfway through, everything becomes invitational. And so at a certain point, it's like you have to fucking suck all this fucking dick for no reason to You know, it's like you have to make these people, you know, and it's like, I've been
Yeah, it
busting
becomes
my
political.
ass. Like, dude, like, when I talk about being weird, I mean weird, like WYRD, like Odin weird. Like, I've been working on this shit my whole life. I've got a PhD. I've been fucking traveling in bands. Like, I do cool shit. That's my fucking thing. And I'm supposed to meet some sickly old white person that can barely fucking walk and like act like they're cool because the only thing they ever did was make it to the fucking 5th degree in the OTO. It's like, I just couldn't, I wasn't the guy. I'm like, I'm doing the thing, and that's for real. And if that's not enough, then fuck you guys. You know, and there are plenty of cool people, don't get me wrong. There are cool people that make, and that's the kind of thing that keeps you going. You know, it's like, you know, my ex-wife took her Minerval initiation 9 months pregnant with my son. My son took his Minerval initiation, his first degree, you know, so it's like my family's been all in this the whole time too. And so, you know, with the OTO, it's a monarchy, but it's sort of like a socialist vision. Like, you know, we're going to have this brotherhood and take care of each other and, you know, all that Masonic stuff. But then there's supposed to be like prophets houses and monasteries. But, you know, the OTO's never owned a piece of property. You know what I mean? It's a bunch of people who can't figure out how to fucking drive a car without a crack in the windshield, really. And so, it's a weird thing. And so until you reach like that halfway point and all of a sudden you're like, oh, now I have to like be in with and it's just like the punk rock scene or any scene, right? What makes it toxic is that the moment you want to sit at the cool kids table, right, you got to care about all this shit that ain't none of your fucking business in the first place.
Yeah, there's something very it takes away from the anarchist quality of it, the heretical part of it, right? When it becomes so organized. There's something that Jack Parsons wrote in We Are the Witchcraft, where he says, where there's too much organization, we depart. It makes me think of that.
And that's a great point. So, you know, Jack Parsons joined the OTO in 1941. He took Minerval in first degree with Grady McMurtry, who would be the person who revived the OTO in the 70s. And that's actually the AA lineage that I'm under, Grady. In 1942, Jack Parsons was the very first person to ever undergo the actual acted out ceremony of Crowley's rewrite of the second degree OTO. And until the late 70s, that was the highest degree ceremony that was ever actually like performed. You know, so it's like, you know, you know, there's a huge misconception about this history. You know, it's like Crowley and all Parsons, all these, none of these, like I have had more OTO initiations than all these guys put together. You know what I mean? Just being in the modern era, because they just weren't done that way. You know, they'd read you the oaths and put you through the 5th degree, but you know, the rites weren't being actually performed. And so by 1946, and this is all documented well in a book called The Unknown God, which is out of print and expensive, but holler at your boy. I got a fucking rare PDF.
Nice.
Yeah, fuck you, Martin Starr. No, just kidding. We love you, Martin Starr. Thanks for outing Gunther. But sorry.
You're good.
But in the Unknown God, you know, we get this story of, you know, Wilfred Smith was the guy running this LA group, and it was really the most active, successful OTO body probably ever in the world to date, right? And you know, Crowley and Gurm are the two guys that are kind of in charge of everything. You know, they're over in Europe. They've never even met any of these people, but they're getting all these personality conflicts. Everyone's arguing, don't know what's going on, and they end up basically ostracizing Wilfred Smith, who was the 10th degree. He was also Jack Parsons' AA mentor. And Jack Parsons' very good friend, even though his initial wife, Helen Parsons Smith, had already transferred. They all remained friends, even after Wilfred and Helen had a baby and shit. Jack was still over there, like hanging out, helping take care of the baby. It was like early polyamory 101 type shit. But in 1946, because they pushed Smith out, Jack Parsons was forced to take over the Agape Lodge in LA, Agape Lodge number 2. And he ran it for a little less than a year. And on August 20th, 1946, Jack Parsons resigned from the OTO, stating that, you know, just like you pointed out in what he said in the Witchcraft, you know, he was stating that this is no place for the flourishment of Thelema. Thelema is the greater movement. Thelema is the Greek word, means will. And the whole idea there is discovering your true will and doing that in the world. I mean, the whole point of Thelema is to do your will and rejoice, you know. The Book of the Law doesn't say shit about sex magic and OTO and these Masonic orders. You know, it's like these are these old Aeon sort of relics that we have decorated in a Thelemic way. But the real problem is, it's this Renaissance notion of the philosopher king, but they didn't have like postmodernism, they didn't have Foucault and Bourdieu, and they didn't understand power and what power does. It's like you put a crown on a philosopher, and the only thing that they can philosophize about from that point on, right? That's the status quo. How do I keep this fucking crown? So that's how you kill a philosopher, by putting a crown on them. The whole idea of a philosopher king is a fraud.
It always makes me think of Gandalf when he refuses the ring.
Yeah, right.
Says, I would take the ring out of a will to do good, but through me it would wield a power greater than you could imagine. For evil.
Exactly. And that's the thing with OTO. When you get to these upper echelons, it's designed in such a way that the only way it works well is when the absolute best of us land in these places, right? But the absolute best of us are smart enough to know that that's bullshit. Like, we don't, like, who the fuck wants to be that guy?
It reminds me of another top-down organization I can think of. So, actually, a bunch.
Yeah,
all governments.
Well, it's all this pyramid scheme, right? And I mean, if you go back and you really look at the history of all this stuff, there's a video on YouTube called The History of Our Enslavement, and it's like a little 12-minute thing. It really summarizes my point here, but it's this idea that human ownership has been the root motivation for all government, all politics, everything. And when you get to this current like democratic model, it's this huge scam because it's like they turned us into free range serfs. It's like,
yeah,
so
100%.
we don't see the cage anymore because we're like, oh, I got a TV and I can PS5.
There's the illusion of choice, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But you can choose where you want to cut hair, but you still got to pay the government to do it. You got to ask their permission. It's like you have to license to cut hair, man. It's fucking weird.
Yeah, it's really weird. So, talking about your separation from the temple, do you want to go into that a little bit, or?
Yeah, there's a bit of nuance. So in the world of Thelema, in the early days, Crowley was in this group called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and partway through that, it becomes invitational, just like the OTO. It's funny, I always say that the OTO is our Golden Dawn of today. And so Crowley was being blocked from progression, and so he went to France and got with the original founder who progressed him, and it blew up in this big drama thing. So he created another grade system called the AA, the Astrum Argentum, the Order of the Silver Star, where it's like the Golden Dawn, but he took all that social shit out. So you have a curriculum and a mentor and a student chain. So basically, mentors are just grading your papers and being like, okay, check, they did the things, next, right? And so you took all that social dimension out, so nobody can like hold you back. It's like you either do the stuff or you don't. And it was years later that the OTO sort of showed up. And that's a whole story. I'll save that tangent for, but I'm like a history buff, so I could go all day with this thing.
Hey, I could listen to it all day, so that's cool.
Right on, man. Basically, in 1912, well, in 1907, Crowley took Mathers. Mathers was the guy that brought him to Golden Dawn. So when Crowley created the AA, they put out the publication of the AA was this sequence of books called the Equinox, and he published all the Golden Dawn rituals. And so the Mathers, the original guy that brought him up, was suing him, and there was a big court case. And throughout that court case, this guy named Theodor Rouse, this German head of the OTO, actually the outer head of the OTO, showed up and made Crowley a 7th degree honorary, because he had all these honorary. Back then, if you were a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason, you could come in the OTO as 7th degree. And so Crowley had those honorary rights, even though he probably never stepped in an actual Masonic lodge a day in his life. When he was in Mexico, he got like all the Masonic honors, and you'll see there's pictures of him all dressed up, but it's like paper. It's all honorary. It's like an honorary PhD. It's like, oh, right. Cool. I didn't do any research or read a book or nothing. Cool story, bro. But anyhow, so then in 1912, he's already an honorary 7th degree. He didn't take much of that seriously. In 1912, he publishes this book called The Book of Lies. And a little while later, Theodore Royce shows up in his office in England and says, you just published the central secret of the OTO, the 9th degree secret. And Crowley's like, what the fuck are you talking about? He presents him with the Book of Lies, and he turns him to, supposedly, the myth is chapter chapter 36, which is the Star Sapphire. It's his Thelemic hexagram ritual. He says encapsulates the secret of the ninth degree of OTO. And right then, supposedly, Crowley realizes like the true secrets of sexual magic and et cetera, et cetera. And so that's when he sort of starts using OTO. And then in the 20s, Theodore Royce would die, and that's when Crowley would sort of take it all over. And so when Crowley dies in 1947, he leaves all of his literary legacy essentially to be managed by OTO. And so that's why they're still relevant today, is because they control his books and copyrights and shit. Other than that, it's just a social fucking group of LARPing motherfuckers that don't do anything but try to fucking, sell social status in a tiny group no one's ever heard of. And so over the years, the AA became like a splinter cell organization because so after Crowley dies in 47, this guy Germer takes over, and Germer's appointed by Crowley to be in charge of everything AA. And so from Crowley to Germer, there's one person who's the head of both OTO and the AA. Germer dies in 62, but Germer kind of ran everyone off. He was like a real insecure fucking asshole. And so he shut down everything. So basically, like, everything's like, everyone thought it was over. Basically in 62 he dies. Nobody even heard about it until 1968. This radical fucking group of Thelemites called Solar Lodge, who this guy Ray Burlingham had initiated up through the ninth degree, like secretly in like 1965, because he thought it was all over. They ended up going and brought, so Germer's wife had like the Crowley fucking legacy, like all of his robes, his manuscripts, all the unpublished books, the original manuscripts for Liberal, the Book of the Law, like all that stuff. And these fucking radical, like acid taking, like Thelemites were like, this senile old lady has all of our relics, and they went and fucking robbed the shit out of her and like blinded her, and like, not awesome, but I mean, I get it too. When you read their version of the story, it's and in fact, Frater Shiva put it up on Lulu on the cheap. All the old editions of the story are kind of expensive, but you can get on Lulu for like $20. It's called Behind the Curtain of Solar Lodge. Really fucking amazing, cool Thelemic adventure story. But anyway, they robbed Sasha Germer in 68. And this is basically what causes Phyllis to contact Grady. And this is what ends up, the OTO gets revamped basically because that got everyone's attention. But when Grady revamped the OTO, he never claimed to be the head of the AA. Now, Grady had already sworn the oath of the Abyss, was a master of the temple, and a certain grade of the AA. So he had some authority there. He just was like, he felt corny issuing it. He had all these letters, but he had all these letters from Crowley because he was in the war. So he spent a couple years with Crowley at the end of his life. And he had all these, Crowley made him the caliph. And so he had these caliphate papers, as they're called now, that gave him the authority to sort of take the reins in an emergency situation and revamp the OTO. And in fact, his word as a magus in the AA was OTO. And so that was like Grady's thing. And then Marcelo Mota was this other guy who had popped up, and Mota claimed to be the head of the AA, which could have possibly, that's feasible at that time. And Grady was like, well, fuck, if you're the imperator, who would say they're imperator of the AA if they weren't? I'm not going to argue. And they ended up fighting about OTO rights. That all got settled in 85. But what I'm getting at is the AA sort of grew up independently from like 62 on. There was no real head. There was nobody wrangling everybody else in. So you have this splinter cell situation where like a teacher dies, right? And then that student takes over. And so over 100 years, or so, you have all of these groups all over the place that come from these different roots. They have different emphasis. There's different cultures like sort of built up around a curriculum, which is fucking cool. And it's like that diversity, that unshakable, unstoppable diversity is the lifeblood of Thelema, in my opinion. And I think that's the stuff that because nobody owns it, it can't be killed. You know what I mean? It's not a mundane on paper organization that way. And so it's once you move in that direction, it's like a living thing, it opens up to you, and you see this for yourself. It's back to that gnostic thing. And so anyhow, the guy in 1985, Grady dies, and he makes this guy named Bill Breeze the head of the OTO. And he chose him because, see, Phyllis, his ex-wife, runs a Jane Wolfe lineage of the AA, and he sort of created his own, and their AA students were sort of tearing OTO apart, trying to like control it. And it's always been this weird, stupid power head fuck thing. When you get into the history, even Crowley, especially, I mean, it fucked up Crowley's head more than anyone. You know, he was doing all kinds of dumb shit, trying to control 10 people in LA he had never even met before. It's fucking stupid. All under the guise of, I'm the leader. Get a grip. And that never stopped, you know, but as a young person, I never saw that side of it for a long time. And a lot of these history books now are out of date and expensive and hard to find. And so it took a long time for me to, well, one, there's a ton of Crowley shit to read anyway. So I was like, I had to get to a point where I felt confident enough and like, okay, I have a grasp of this stuff before I'm like, now I'm going to read all the history books about it. You know, it's like, oh, that's like retired white people shit, right? You know, but once you go through it, you realize, fuck, man, all these, you realize, you know, as a kid, you have all these fantasies about the glory days and shit, you know, but it's like, man, they were just as fucked up as we were, if not more. I mean, and so over the years, so since 1985, right, the last 40 years, this guy has been running the OTO, and he, around 1989, propped up his AA teacher as the one true leader of the AA. And if you want to be officially in Thelema, you now have to come to these two people now own all of the Thelema, and you know, you got to come lick our balls or else you're not real Thelema. And so this has been ongoing 40 years. Well, in 2018, they put out a book called One Truth, One Spirit. This guy, Keith Reddy, who'd gone and got a master's degree in Amsterdam in Western esotericism, was like, "Ooh, I'll suck your dick a lot, watch." And he wrote this whole book that basically just sort of codified in a lot of detail there. It's like a fucking 600-page book. And just codified their narrative as the owners of Thelema. And so, you know, of course, right away, everyone's like, oh, it's the head of that AA is named Daniel Gunther. And so Bill Breeze and Dan Gunther are like sort of the two, like one owns the OTO and the other's like the only real AA. And that's the only one the OTO promotes. So like in the back of every, you know, they own Crowley's legacy. So any Crowley book that's published, you know, the AA contact is like only theirs and so forth and so on. So it's like this, and they've been kicked, and like all the other heads of AA that have been in OTO over the years, Jerry Cornelius, Jim Eshelman, Ray Eels, Joseph Ravelli, et cetera, they've all been kicked out for repping their AA line and so forth. So it's been a nasty thing. And so anyway, you know, everyone was like, oh, more Gunther trash, you know, sort of standard one-page reviews. And their whole criticism the whole time was like, nobody's addressing what we actually wrote. And I was like, hold on, you wrote a lot. When that book came out, I spent maybe 5 hours a day, maybe 3 or 4 days a week for about a month and a half. And I just combed through this motherfucker line by line. And I just noted everywhere they changed things a little bit. Most commonly, they would leave stuff out that didn't like support their arguments. And then sometimes just made shit up altogether. And so I had just spent like the prior 3 years before this, like collecting and reading like all the history books about this stuff as possible. And so it was just like weird karmically, and this like, I was like, I'm the only one who can do this right, you know, that sort of sense of duty. And so, you know, I spent a lot of time, I wrote this like 30-page essay, like just calling all their shit out. And also they failed to look at the logical limits of their own arguments. So if we were to take even their arguments against all of the other lineages seriously and apply it also to them, it just makes the whole thing fucking stupid. And that's, you know, so it's like the worst part of all is they're just making us all look like meaningless fucking idiots, you know? So I felt it, you know, a deep spiritual duty to speak up. And I've been having a lot of art commissioned. The guy who taught me music actually back home has been doing all this art for me. And so I had him draw up. I had this idea of like, you know, like the young Darth Vader, like slaying all the Padawans, you know? So I was like, ooh, I'll make Gunther, you know, Emperor Palpatine, and Bill Breeze will be Vader, like doing the bidding of his master, you know, trying to own Thelema. And I put myself in the back with a hole in my chest, like they had slayed me, which was prophetic. And Hymenaeus Beta is his name as the head of OTO, so I called him Darth Beta. And then Absissimus is the top grade of the AA that only one person can hold, so he became Emperor Absissimus. And I knew that they would be a little butthurt, but I also thought, like, you know, I still was holding on to these ideas that, like, those guys have to be like enlightened somehow, you know, in order to be in those places, you know, even though I was like really confronting a lot of fuckery and a lot of other, there's a lot more going on in the background locally and stuff. I had dated some crazy chick and I had like clouds over my head with that and stuff. So that's why, you know, when they came after me, it's like they used this kid, this 24-year-old kid who had like taken under my wing for the past 4 years. I've been like taking this kid around all over the country to show him, like, because he come up in a place where it was like all these Gunther zealots, and they're like, no, Thelema has to be like this, and I'm like, dude, you have to see these other places. It's not like that everywhere. And they hated it, so they went to them, and they must have gone. This kid was like a cool ass kid who was like doing all this work, and nobody took him seriously. He had like dreadlocks, and he looked like Wookish and shit. But like, you know, he was like, you know, he really just wanted to be like, listen, like he wanted a seat at the table, you know. And so I was like the first old guy who was like, I dig you, let's party, you know. And we were up at my place, like eating acid and summoning demons, and you know, like he's bringing all of his friends from New Mexico up, and they fucking hated it. So they went to him. They must have like promised him some advancement. I mean, it could have been a lot of things, and I get it. And all of a sudden, he's like, "Oh, Chris tried to make me have sex with him," and you know, they started calling everyone and that had ever visited me or dated me, and they were like, "What did Chris do? What about that?" You know, they're like trying to sell this thing, and they painted me as a threat to women in order, and that's like, I guess, a popular thing. And I hate to. I'm not on that bandwagon because I don't want to fucking take away from the truth of actual abuse that's out there, you know. So it really pisses me off that, you know, I have to even play this fucking card of like, oh, I'm another fucking guy that was accused of shit I didn't do. And that just makes it fucking worse to me because I'm not the one, you know. I'm not the one lying to my friends and, you know, playing some fucking game. Like, I've worked too hard to have it on the table, you know. Anyway, it's so all that fuckery blew up, and you know, there's a lot of cool shit going on through that whole story, and a lot of fucking, you know, it's like me just slowly peeling back this layer of seeing like what is really motivating these upper degree people who are running this shit. And you slowly realize they're not these enlightened. There's some cool fucking there are some cool folks out there, but there's a lot of fucking nepotism. You know, when you talk about the Western Hemisphere, you're talking about 7th degree and above, like the Hermit Triad of people supposedly doing all this Sanctuary of the Gnosis, sex magic stuff. You're talking, there's 42 people in there right now. You know, this is like 150-year-old organization, you know, international, you know, there's probably about 2,000 active members worldwide, you know, and it hovers at that. But they do the Scientology thing. So their numbers are like 4,000 or 5,000 because they don't take you off when you're not active anymore. Like, so get, you know,
Gotcha.
so yeah, their numbers are always about half when you look at who's active, because they bring a lot of people in. It's really cool at first, and the initiations are fucking cool. You know, there's a lot of cool stuff there, and it's fun. And when it's just you and your friends like doing this shit and exploring the mysteries and having fun, it's great. But in Denver, it's like I watched all these upper degree people move here, and it's like they tested all of us. They're like, "Who's going to suck our dicks?" And I was like, you need to say something cool at least first. Fuck, tickle me. I don't know. It's like, you know, they were like, oh, and then, you know, they got the guys who were like, oh, yes, please. You know, they had them stab the rest of us in the back. They all got invited to the 5th degree. And now when you go to their shit, it's like this boring church culture. Everyone there is just like trying to impress 2 people. What's the fucking, you know, what's the point?
That's fascinating. I could listen to that all day.
I could literally go all day.
Because I'm not in on that history, so it's a really interesting peek into things.
Well, the analogy I use now is it's like when Pinocchio became a real boy.
I like it.
And so, you know, the book is about explaining these subtleties of why it was worth it, why I took so much abuse over the years. I mean, I have my ribs broken by people. I've probably been ripped off for $25,000 through the years of Thelemites trying to help people and donate. And, you know, so why did I even continue? Why did it take so long? And, you know, really the way that they turned people that I really loved against me so easily, that's what hurt. And it took a few years of just like, fuck, everyone's fake, nothing has meaning anymore.
Yeah, so can you go into those, like, can you go into those few years? Because that's kind of what I want to hear about, is you after, in the aftermath of all of this.
Yeah, so it was the AA ultimately that was real. And it's so funny because when I was dated this chick, and she had borderline personality disorder, and she was the head of OTO in Denver when I first moved here. And she had beat up 5 other guys before me. And after about 3 or 4 months of dating, it started happening. She would attack me. And I've never been in a physical relationship with anyone in my life. Like, my mom never spanked me, you know what I mean? So that was like a weird head fuck. And of course, I just left a 17-year marriage to like chase this priestess fantasy and have, my Thelemite partner and all this. And, and this chick was beating the fuck out of me, man. Like, she broke 2 of my ribs in our bishop's house. And eventually, after a year and a half of this kind of fuckery going on, of course, you tell people your girlfriend's beating you up, and it's like, yeah, that's weird. And it's different. Nobody cared, It's
yeah, like, there's a double standard.
Maybe you should break up. And about a year and a half into it, man, she like attacked me one night. We were all tripping on mushrooms, and we fell down, and she smacked her head. And then like a few days later, she told everyone. Then I forced my way in her house and like threw her down. And so that put like this weird cloud over my head, even though she's got she has a 17-year arrest record here of like beating up her boyfriends that like everyone ignored. Like a year before they made her the body master, she had been arrested for felony assault against another OTO member. And so the people responsible for putting her in power ignored all of this willfully. And so they played a huge role also in trying to shut me the fuck up, because I would never stop talking about this stuff afterwards. So I'm like, I've been in OTO longer than all of you guys. Even though, because I went to college and sat in the same degree for fucking 15 years instead of like working on OTO and progressing. So by the time I got over here, it's like these people are like, who's this guy? And it's like, well, anyway, I was like, I'm not the one, all the guys she beat up before just went away, because why would they fucking stay around just like this group of drama and shit? But it was like, I'd already devoted my life to this stuff. So when all that drama broke out, that's really when I started to pursue the AA, because I realized like, man, the OTO, no matter what I do, I'm always going to be beholden to the opinions of these other people who, granted, there's probably plenty of good examples of actual abuse and people that are, being blocked for good reason. But there's also a huge avenue for somebody that's way above my degree to say whatever, and nobody's going to ask them even any questions, And so I needed something that I was in control of, and that was more thelemic in my mind. And so that's what brought me to the AA. And so I've been in a couple different AA lines at this point. And so there's, that's a whole book. But, it was my AA brothers and sisters who really, supported me through the OTO, because for all these years leading up to all the blow up, I was focusing on the AA. And so that's really where the deep, like real spiritual inner work is happening, because it's required. You do the work, you move on. It's not like, oh, we like you and you didn't rape anyone yet, you can do the next thing.
Right.
Which is like, and so I'd already switched to Grady line, and in fact, it was a progression in the AA, I think, that played a big role in the blow up, because the OTO was my public expression of Thelema, and the AA was sort of my inner expression. I've never posted much about that side, and so it was moving. It was a certain progression in the AA that was like, I was carrying all this drama. The OTO was like sucking all my time and energy. It was like this huge distraction from everything. And so it just put me in a situation where I couldn't tell myself any more stories about, oh yeah, that sucked. But it's like you have all these ways of making excuses for people and things. And I just, when they turned on my these people that I loved, that I would have done anything for, it's like they came at them with a completely made up fucking story. Like nobody asked any questions. They're like, okay, Chris is bad now. And I just like, I couldn't fucking lie to myself about what the fuck that meant for the group and everything else. And so, getting booted was terribly painful, but it was a part of a huge initiatory transformation. I'm no longer I can say what I want. Like for years, if I talked about getting my ribs broke in my bishop's house, I'd get a fucking message, Chris, you have to go delete this comment or we're going to put you on bad report in the OTO, and it's like, here's this motherfucker with about as much real world authority as a goddamn shift manager at the fucking local Taco Bell, like threatening me over what I can say on fucking Facebook. I'm a goddamn Thelemite. I have a fucking PhD. You know what I mean? All you are is a fucking redneck wino. Like, how does anyone fucking sit with this? You know? And so, you know, it just had to come to that head for me to be like, well, yep, I can't fucking lie about it anymore.
So you got involved with the Acephalus movement. Do you want to talk a little bit about and maybe go back a little bit? Does that lead into that story good? Like, is that good? Does that lead into that well?
Yeah. So what happened about a year after getting booted from the OTO, these two young kids from Sacramento. So a lot of my AA group, like my mentor and the head of our line, is in Sacramento, and this is the Grady McMurtry lineage, which is a branch off of Jerry Cornelius's work. And so anyhow, this wonderful lady named Heather Schubert had two students moving out here, and her and I share a mentor. And so it's this interesting web. In fact, it's funny because the OTO wouldn't even tell me what I was being accused of. They started calling my AA students and telling them I did all this shit. So I didn't even know what was being said about me until my AA students would like call me right away and be like, oh my God, this is what they're saying, you know? So it's a weird sort of web because that stuff's not public. Nobody knows those relations. So it's like, you never know if you're talking to an AA person or, you know, how they're associated, what their lineage, who their students and stuff are. So you know, these two people moved to Denver, and they just showed up at my door with sort of all this exuberance of, you know, let's just start doing some shit, whatever. It's my birthday next month. Like, let's just do mass. So we started doing these Gnostic masses. And about the third month, so I had an AA student in Colorado Springs who met these Bhakti Thelemic like sacramentalists in the Greenfield lineage, and Alan Greenfield was my first bishop in the EGC way back in the Raw Harakte days in Jacksonville, Florida. So that was like a funny, weird, you know, full circle thing. At that time, I had also another AA student in Baltimore who had received a charter to operate all the OTO degrees, lodge degrees through the seventh through this United Rites of the OTO in Europe. And so it's like right at the same time, like I wasn't, you know, at this point I'm burnt out. I'm like, all these people are fake. These kids are like super into it. So I'm like trying to be like, okay, let's see what happens. And all of a sudden, like, you know, just a couple months of momentum of doing mass with these kids, and Bob McDonald shows up and consecrates us all bishops, which gives us a huge amount of ecclesiastical authority to create different structures and so forth. And at the same time, I also get a charter to operate like all the OTO degrees. And so it's like all of this stuff that was sort of being held against me through the OTO just opened up with after I was fucking like, fuck all this shit, you know? And
yeah,
so
that's interesting to me how that works, right? It's like at the moment you let go, it all comes back.
Yeah.
And becomes available in a way that you didn't like ever maybe even expect. That's
well,
really
and
cool.
I think, well, all of this stuff, you know, it always shows up in the most unexpected ways. I think that's how people ruin their magic the most, is because, you know, you want this cool thing, and I'm the worst, you know, I'm like a brat. I'm like, oh, this was supposed to be more fun though, you know, but you know, we're just grounding shit out and being in the way all the time.
Yeah. I get in my own way plenty.
Well, it's even with the subconscious, you know, it's like take money magic, you know, like for someone like me who comes from this like anarchist sort of background, it's like, oh, money's evil. Well, money magic's never going to work if you have this deep-seated unconscious belief that money's evil, because your subconscious is insulating all that. You know what I mean? And so you have to,
yeah, it's blockage.
You have to find a way to tell. I mean, money can still be as bad and all the problems it is, but it can still be this tool, you know? So it's like you just change the language a little bit and tell a different story about a thing, and you can open stuff up right away.
Yeah, that's a very chaos magic approach too. I like it.
Well, that's because chaos magic is sort of like a meta theory of how all the not chaos magic works anyway.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. So you're a wandering bishop, as you just mentioned.
Yes. So I took the name Kal Halaj after the Sufi martyr Mansour el Halaj.
Very cool. And can you talk? You mentioned in our phone conversation, and this is an area of endless fascination to me, but you had mentioned that tradition can be traced back to the Cathars. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. So the Cathars were by, let's see, God, oh man, I haven't looked at the dates in a minute. I'm thinking like 1250 or something like that. It was around that, the Abyginian.
Yeah.
So right after the Fifth Crusade, the Catholics decided that, well, we're not being successful in the Holy Lands because we have all these heretics here in Europe. So the Cathars were a huge group that rivaled Catholicism, especially in southern France, particularly in southern France, and so that Abyginian crusade sort of, and that's where Metallica, kill them all, God, let God sort them out. That's one of the generals leading that march into the Languedocs of the southern communities of the Cathars. One of the soldiers said, how do we know who the heretics are? And the French general said, kill them all, God will know his people. And so, they murdered women, children, men, whole fucking populations of these Cathars, these Gnostic Christians, who were, very ascetic, vegetarian. There was a certain vow that some men took where they cut off their dicks and stuff. So the celibacy was... Yeah, exactly. And so it's like a very much more ascetic, Essene-like, even one could probably argue, version of Christianity. But they didn't take the Bible, they didn't take the canonical Bible and certainly the papacy's authority with any seriousness. And so there's probably a lot more politics involved in any sort with everything with major religion, especially when there's wars involved. There's politics, resources, but mostly resources have always been humans. Controlling humans.
Yeah, the Cathars were also very, very rich in lands and
exactly.
treasure. Yeah,
right.
So well, it comes back to that a lot, right?
Well, in the Templars, there's a lot of supposed connections there, and of course, the OTO is the order of the order of the Oriental Templars, the order of the Eastern Templars. So it's a Templar order fundamentally as well. So that current is there because they protected the Jews, they protected a lot of the minority religious groups of the time. So it wasn't like just one group. It was a regular thing that they did, like throughout the Inquisition, because that was really the beginning of the Inquisition. Because then after that, they were like, oh, now the Jews, of course, right? And there's witches probably here somewhere. But
right.
So all of a sudden, though, you had these Cathar priests and bishops who no longer had a diocese. Their whole entire congregation had been murdered. And so that began the tradition of the vagabond episcopos, the wandering bishop. And so that became very quickly incorporated into, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So about mid-19th century, so about 500 years later, 600 years later, anyway, you had a guy named Doinel, okay, and he's a Southern French minister, and he ends up channeling a bunch of these old Cathar bishops and church fathers. And so he's the guy who's basically responsible for the whole Gnostic revival, and that would be very big, that would become big in like various Masonic circles, Martinism, and then of course OTO. So the OTO has a whole ecclesiastical side called the Ecclesia Gnostico Catholica, or the EGC. And so Liber 15, the Gnostic Mass, is the Mass that Crowley wrote, encapsulating the ninth degree secret, which gives people who are initiates a way to work with it. That's the whole point of that Mass. Was the primary public ritual for the EGC. Of course, it was never celebrated. Crowley never really saw it ever put on. It was first celebrated by Wilfred Smith and these guys in LA. And now it's like the big public thing that OTO uses to like, they're like, ooh, do you like that? You want to join our group? Kind of thing. So for the past year and a half, I've been doing these masses every month publicly with these kids, with no group, we're not like using it to sell you on something, just like doing it and exploring these mysteries. And it's attracted, we've got like 20 people, coming every third Sunday, and we have a little party afterwards. And it's like this cool community that we were never even trying to really develop. But it's like there's no group, there's nobody who owns it or controls it. So, that's where the Akephalos things comes in. I found, there's a lot about the bornless ritual and the headless rite and ceremonial magic, and Crowley incorporates this in a major way with Liber Samek and some of the Holy Guardian Angel workings, and also at least the symbology of it is in the introductory chapter of Liber 7, the prologue of the Unborn. But it's if we go back to the 5th century Alexandria, the word Akephalos was first used in an ecclesiastical sense to refer to an entire group of Alexandrian bishops who had sort of seceded from the authority of the papacy of Rome. And so also a lot of people don't know, like during this period, Rome was like it was like the bad part of town, it was like the ghetto. It was like right after a war. And so they were like, fuck the Pope, this guy's crazy, we're not going to do it. And so they were called the Akephalos of Alexandria. It was just these group of bishops who refused to answer to any higher authority than themselves. And they saw their task as making the sacraments available. I'm sort of working on an essay of ecclesiastical rights right now, and I'm sort of working out, because really I'm an apostate of the EGC. I'm a priest of the EGC. I've been kicked out. I'm now an apostate, but now I've been raised into a wandering bishop, and I'm a headless bishop with a Thelemic dispensation. So I'm no longer dispensing the Christian. Well, I mean, I would argue that I'm dispensing Christian mysteries, but under a new, we're no longer scared of our dicks. And,
right.
If you think about it, one thing you learn with the central secret of OTO is, we're these, sex is part of our expressions as these solar, divine, creative beings, right? We're creators, and so that sexual expression is a way of direct interaction with that, especially under training, in a yogic sense, right? But you think about it, for 2,000 years, the Christians robbed us of that expression by making us all fear it, feel bad about it. It's like you jerk off and you're like, oh, is anyone looking? Whatever. It's like we're crawling out of 2,000 years. The whole fucking world's scared of their dicks, man. And it's like, that's why we're killing each other. Because we don't know the power we have right here, to commune with the spirits, to, explore these mysteries of existence and shit, it's all within us.
Yeah, and we have that power. The only thing that's going to able to take that power away from me is being convinced under the lie that I'm not connected to it. Right.
Exactly.
And so doing, I then become disconnected from it because I am a co-creator of reality. Right.
Yeah, you have to give it up. That's the only way. And you have to be scammed into giving it up. And it's usually guilt and fear, because, it's the fear of death, and that's why like these Masonic death rites, the 3rd degree, especially the 3rd degree of OTO, like I saw it as the ultimate revolution because, freedom, real freedom, to quote Nina Simone, freedom is no fear. And, the ultimate, all of our fears are rooted in the fear of death, the fear of future loss, the fear of the unknown. And when you have, for example, I could teach somebody one pranayama trick. If they really had the discipline to do it for, say, 3 weeks, they would be outside of their body at some point. They would have an experience of the part of themselves that's forever. And it's that kind of experience that sort of relinquishes the hold of those chains of fear around death, because you realize, you see for yourself, you have an experience of yourself beyond that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Gordon White calls it becoming invincible. I
Yeah.
think for me, that happened through addiction, and I died as a result of an overdose and had a near-death experience. And
Yes, that'll do it.
yeah, that'll do it, right? And then, and the other, and the other AA, which is the one that I'm involved in, they talk about how, in order to reconnect with this power that allows me to be the person that I was meant to be, I have to have a spiritual experience. Right. And I think it actually came from a conversation that Bill Wilson had with Carl Jung over letters.
I love that. And so I bounced around this. It's in the book, of course, but I shot heroin and dilaudid all through grad school the whole time. It's not a terrible story because, I was super functional. I got straight A's and shit. I got a fucking PhD. And that's why I moved to Colorado, because it was my ex-wife's family who were, showing up and fucking, keeping that, you're in a house full of junkies. It's like vampires. You're all like swarming and shit.
Absolutely.
And so
that's so much what it's like.
Yeah, I had to put 5 states between us, and ultimately it's part of why I ended up getting divorced and stuff. But I have a lot to say. It's because I have that story and I'm so open about it. And the OTO, of course, used that stuff. They're like, "Oh, he's a drug addict," because I'm so open about this. But since I've been in Colorado, I've been clean 12 years, and I've helped so many people get clean. And one thing I realized is, all of our ideas of addiction are based on really bad science. And the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And you have to build the kind of life that you want to be present for. And when that's true, you can party. Now, some people should never have a drop of alcohol or a drop of, and I probably shouldn't have a drop of heroin. And I'm not saying necessarily that, but right. I'm not scared to party a little bit, and I'm like, I eat acid with my friends and shit, but it's like,
I can go anywhere without fear, but that's not very common in my experience, within the recovery community, because there's still a lot of fear associated with that. So there's this other current, which is, I would say, is a prevailing current of like, I'm going to be afraid of my addiction from now on. I'm going to be afraid of these things from now on. And I'm going to sit here in this room and avoid that stuff. And I'm certainly not running towards it, but I'm certainly not afraid of it either.
Well, and because, but the fear begets control, and you're in a situation where you don't really have control, and so the solution is actually like love and surrender, right?
Yeah.
Surrendering to that truth. There are relevant criticism. I have a brother, a Thelemite brother here, AA, OTO, and everything, and recovering alcohol. I've seen him off, like I've not realized real bad.
Yeah.
But he's super involved with AA, both AAs, and has all sorts of interesting spiritual interpretations. In fact, he might be a fun guest.
I would love, I would love to talk, because I'm planning on doing some episodes about that coming up. Yeah.
Well, he struggled with the way it's presented through that Christian lens, ultimately.
Well, and it's also this idea of like, giving up your will and surrendering your will. But I would argue that I only have to do that. And this may be like, in a way, sort of an inner mystery of AA, honestly. But yeah, I surrender my will because I had a disease of the will.
Right. But
once I'm able to surrender that, I actually gain the ability to use my will properly.
Yeah. And so in one of the OTO initiations, that's called the first paradox of philosophy, is that you have to submit, you have to willingly submit to discipline in order to make progress. Yeah. That makes sense. Rings true, right? It's like what would your arm do without the muscles in it? It would just be limp. Right. And so, but when it comes to higher power and God, like, these are loaded terms, and people have been traumatized by a lot of this stuff. Yeah. And even those that don't realize they're even the people that are into it are traumatized. They might not realize it, but it's like people carry so much baggage about what that has to be and how that has to look. And the AA could do more to articulate that, not to necessarily fill in the blank, but to provide people with more directions, to explore. And you could probably accomplish that in local face-to-face meetings and stuff, just talking to people. But there's some legitimate criticisms there, I think.
There's always legitimate criticisms, and there's always legitimate criticisms of any tradition that, like,
if you want to move it forward.
Exactly. And so there's also like a big current of like, this book is divinely inspired and this is it.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, man, I'm not really, like, I'm here because this is the place where I'm able to hook up with other addicts that my experience might be able to help. You know what I mean? So
I do.
It's not about like, I'm going here to get the divine inspiration from this book that was written in 1943 or whatever. It's I'm here because this is where the current is, because it's what we got. And that might not be ideal, right?
No, but it's impactful.
Yeah.
It's unquestionably impactful.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me too, because it does have sort of like an apostolic succession kind of flavor to it too.
I've seen that.
Like the guy that, he doesn't even like to be called a sponsor, but the guy that I do the work with, who you can go back to who did the work with him and who did the work with him and who did the work with him to the very beginning. So that's cool to me. I like that idea.
I like it too. I'm a history buff, so those like my AA lineage, I could go on and on with all that kind of stuff.
Lineages are cool.
Yeah, it's a cool story, man.
So
but when they bring up the big religious stuff, you know what I always tell them? I'm a gnostic. I'm from the show me religion.
Yeah. And I'm
like, and don't tell me how great your book is. Show me.
Right. And I think that anyone that's really doing it is doing that.
Yeah.
And then if you're not, you're, like you said, if you're not, you're fucking LARPing.
Well, and Thelema, there's this concept of aeonic succession that we're right now moving into. You can think of it like the astrological ages are shifting right now. We're moving into this age of Aquarius, and the messianic image is different, right? Jesus was a predator. Jesus was a fisherman. Jesus cast his net and pulled up whatever the fuck he caught. He didn't ask for consent. He didn't ask anybody. He just it's like saving you, and so people are stuck, and people are waiting for somebody to come save them, because like there's a complex now, and so the shift in the new Aeon and the Thelemic Messiah, so to speak, is a gardener. They're tending their garden. They're that exemplar. They're being that window to the world. They're the show me's.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe taking that as a segue, and this is definitely a loaded question. But how do you feel that spirits are involved in the evolution of consciousness? If you talk about wanting to evolve, these institutions that we create, that's also happening to our consciousness as well, right? And how do you say the spirits are involved with that?
Well, we have a record, for one, of thousands of years of. Let's just be clear first on the word spirit. Let's take this very loosely. We know we have a record of thousands of years of these strange entities showing up in different various capacities with teachings and instructions. And if you put the sort of the dogmatic and bureaucratic political side, so to speak, of religion, what we might call the exoteric, and you look at those esoteric parts and the roots of how all this stuff started, it's very often a set of techniques that could be loosely called types of meditation for the evolution of consciousness. Those techniques might have been prayers, invocations, oracles, all of which are ways of evolving our consciousness. But in every case, I call this the God scam. This bureaucracy came in and they put a cap on it and they tried to own it and they tried to dispense it in a certain way. And that's what orthodoxy is, and that's my enemy. I'm the forever apostate pirate wizard, a Kephalos, wandering bishop. I'd rather be a vagabond than a slave.
Hell yeah.
But the spirits, we have a record, first of all, secondly, and most importantly, is if you ever read, I can remember being a little kid, being in staying with my uncle, my cousin or something, going to Sunday school, right? And I would raise my hand and I would ask these adults, I would say, you just told us a story about all these people, this guy, who's talking to God and having these experiences. Like, why don't you do that? Have you ever been taken on some fucking up the ladder? Have you seen an angel? What do they look like? That was me at like 7 years old. And so now I can safely say that I've discovered and determined techniques that I can teach scientifically, objectively anyway, repeatable results for people to have their own interactions with these spirits, and so when you when you have the power to experiences for yourself, then the books and what everyone else says matters even fucking less. You know what I mean? You're talking to the source. So what are these things? Are they transdimensional beings? Are they, astral entities? When it comes to, trying to explain sort of their objectiveness, it's sporting and fun and cool, I have all these different ideas about how all this stuff might work, but it's difficult to verify. But we can have these experiences, we can have these communications, and we can have these interactions. And you don't have to rely on some 3,000-year-old record of it, because the truth is, we're finally, we've been scared of these guys most of the time, and it's like, now it's the new Aeon, dude. Like, they're dying to hang out and fucking chat and tell you what's up and shit. And, for the past 1,000 years in the Grimoire tradition, everyone was like, oh, I'm not worthy, it's like they had to like not eat for 3 days and wash their feet right and stuff. But it's like that was all for us. That wasn't for the spirits. They're ready, they're here, so I would say make your own record, and depend less on what other people's records show. The spirits give you almost what you need. It's dependent on what type of spirit set, Enochian, Goetia, angels, demons, yada yada yada. And I have a lot to say about those dichotomies, because people carry a lot of moral baggage. That Christian sort of moral taxonomy of spirits is such bullshit. It really is a huge wall for people starting out. Because frankly, the spirits don't care about morality. They don't even fucking know what you're talking about. That's another thing. Do yourself, go bring moral questions to some of these spirits, and you just get these weird riddles. They don't even know what you're talking about, because Socrates showed 2,000 years ago, it's recorded in the dialogue of Euthyphro, that morality has nothing to do with God. Morality is human shit. So it has to do with this illusion of time. Get up every day and like, oh fuck, what should I be doing? That's where morality comes from. The spirits they don't live under that same sort of experience of linear time. So those moral questions are like riddles to them. And it's a very interesting thing to test. And so anyway, that moral fucking taxonomy of like the dark spirits and angels will fucking step on you just as quick of they don't care. It's like a gear or a mechanism in the universe. They'll roll right over you and not think twice.
That's a really good point. And
but I
really enjoy the idea that morality is time based. That's one to sit with.
It was one of the Enochian kings who taught me that. I was being taught Enochian with a group here in Denver 10 years ago, and I was doing some Golden Dawn initiations that had to do with the elements, and I was like, let's go to all the Watchtower kings, and they were like, oh, nobody really talks to the kings. And I was like, fuck that, we're Thelemites. I'll be the magician. I'll talk to them. And we went to all the kings, and I interrogated them. It's cool, and lots of cool stuff came out of that. But one of them put a fucking gold coin into my heart, and basically explained that they're living in an eternal space made these questions I was asking not make sense. It was like 2 weeks later that I connected that to the dialogue of Euthyphro and Socrates. And I was like, that's exactly what Socrates showed fucking 2,000 years ago. The spirit explained it. And it never dawned on me that it was this notion of time. But it was actually the fucking king of the goddamn earth tablet that like explained the nature of time and how it related to our like weird ideas about morality and what's the right thing to do with our lives and stuff.
Very cool.
So talk to the spirits, man. They will, it's like they'll give you all these puzzles, it'll be like weeks later. You'll be like, holy shit, that's what they were talking about. What the fuck?
Yeah, and like
Cheeky
images that
bastards.
unfold. Yeah, dude, definitely.
But it's like, it's difficult to say, what they are. I mean, with the Enochian spirits. So I have a like hour-long talk I did in Sacramento that's on a video channel on these, because we did, through that King adventure, we ended up discovering all these the demons within this angelic structure. And they defined demon to mean a secret servant. And so they had this whole completely different relationship. It's almost like, if you think of the Enochian watchtowers and those angelic spirits, like each square composing like a brick of a castle, these demons are like the mortar that glues it and binds it all together. So it's almost like you don't have one without the other, but it's not like it's not like a dualistic thing like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely tracks. That's cool, man.
So I could do like a whole nother session on just that.
Definitely. Very fun talking to you. Great stuff, dude.
Right on.
Awesome, man. So real quick, do you want to tell people where they can find you? Any websites or anything like that?
I just have I have Chris Harden as my YouTube channel, and just mostly I'll put some polemic stuff, like I'll have people read the holy books up on the top of the mountains around here, and then I put out all these jam videos. It's kind of my weird on top of the world spell thing that I do in the mornings. So it's just Chris Harden on YouTube, and then on Facebooks and stuff. I haven't really been promoting myself in any official capacity. The only book I've ever put out so far has been on a parallel in time integration technique for differential equations. So this will be, I have like a few things like on the burner right now. I have this cool coffee table book with all the art, and then the OTO story. And then my adept thesis will be coming, Outlaw Thelema, The Rise of the Akevalos.
Awesome, Chris. Well, it was great to have you on. I'm really excited to see what you're coming up with in the future, man. And it was great talking to you.
Right on, brother. Appreciate you.
Hey, appreciate you. Have a great rest of the evening.
Cheers.
Cheers. Well, there's no doubt in my mind that Chris is living his true will. And it makes me glad to know that he is up there in the mountains dancing his dance here at the turning of the age. I really vibe with his message. There's no one that can tell me what I came here to do. That's for me to figure out and for me to live out. And the connection to power is direct, not achieved through hierarchies, available to all who would seek it. The kingdom of heaven is within you, which might be a scary thought because it means that I am fully and completely responsible for what that looks like, for what that means. But every plunge, every leap, and every great voyage is preceded by fear. It's like the ultimate gatekeeper. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to tarry outside the gate waiting for someone to let me in. I'm storming that bastard. So until next time, thanks for listening. I gotta fly.